What is coaching? What is good coaching? What does it look like? I have so many scars from mistakes I've made. Right, I could literally write a book.
How you're then coaching now?
I start from committing at least 25 to 45 minutes a week in a dedicated one-to-one conversation with all of my rapport. I'm not asking for much of your time. I'm just asking for regular feedback. Would you be comfortable with that? And guess what? I've never had anybody say no.
What would not actually be coaching that people might think it is?
What I try not to do, and I fall into this trap all the time.
Today, we are chatting with Andy Champion, VP and General Manager at Highspot. Andy was here to share his wisdom on coaching and developing leaders. And if there's one thing I'm sure we can all agree on, is that the landscape we find ourselves in today is drastically different from what it was last year, and it's likely to evolve even more by next year. Therefore, maintaining a continuous feedback and adaptation loop facilitated by skilled coaches and great leaders is something I believe like every organization should aspire to have. And so today with Andy, we're talking about how leaders can step up their game by investing time in becoming ace coaches that not only develop talents, but also attract and retain them. Andy is going to spill the beans on the mindset shift leaders ought to make, how he's trying to be the best coach he can be in his day-to-day, practical coaching tips like using Grow Model in one-on-ones, and we'll even touch on how AI is and will be changing the coaching game. So with that, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Andy. What is up, guys? All right, if you're still wondering how generative AI is going to change the sales game, say no more, because I want to introduce to you Clay. In short, it combines prompt engineering with multiple data sources for ultra-personalized outbound campaigns. It's like something you've never seen before, and Clay truly revolutionizes the outbound game. I'm not going to tell you much more, but please just check out wearesales.com/Clay. That's wearesales.com/CLAY. Please, can you introduce yourself and why you added bring some past experiences as well?
Absolutely. Delighted to be here. Thank you for having me as a guest. I do hope the audience finds this of value. And I'd look forward to any comments and feedback. So as you said, my name is Andy Champion. I am employed as the VP and General Manager of Highspot. I am responsible for all of our business outside of North America. So for us, that means all of our people in Germany, in France, Australia, and of course, as you can probably guess from my accent, the UK. We have over 100 people, and I've been in my current role for just coming up to 3 years. I've been in sales and sales leadership for 27 years. I joke about 20 plus years, but it's actually 27. I was adding that up. Most of my experience has been in the MarTech and sales tech industry, predominantly selling into enterprise. But I've also had an increasing amount of experience selling into commercial, mid-market, and SMB. Some of the companies I have worked for, people will know the likes of Oracle. I was acquired into Oracle, having been through a successful IPO with Responsys. I had another IPO with a company called Yext in the MarTech space. But I've also worked for organizations like DocuSign as well. So I've got an experience sort of across predominantly pre-IPO businesses going through IPO, but a couple of large organizations that we may touch on. But unusually for, I think, somebody in sales leadership, I actually started my career in the Army. And I think as we go through this and we discuss coaching and the importance of people, as I look back and reflect on my experience, I think a lot of the things that drive me today, a lot of the values that I have actually came were really brought out for me during my time at Sandhurst and my 6 years in the infantry as an officer.
That's interesting. I immediately wanted to ask you the question, like, what is it then that you still have with you, in you, coming from the Army? But I'm sure that's maybe something that you will then bring in during the entire conversation that we will have now. Because maybe, and as you mentioned, like, you know, you mentioned already coaching and the importance of people. And that's indeed like something that you also mentioned in the preparation, that is something that you take very seriously in your job, not because it is your responsibility. I mean, yes, of course, because it is your responsibility, but also because you can tell it's something that impacts the business, but also the people that you are attracting with that. And so I absolutely love this mindset. And I believe that many people will actually agree with you, with us, that that is important. But I still have a tendency to think that people, yes, agree with the importance of coaching, but not always with it's not always perceived like they are the best coaches per se, even though they think it's important. So I don't know, what's your take on this?
So a few questions in there that maybe I try and unpick. The first one, and you made the comment about what are some of the things that stay with me from my time in the military. Look, one of the things I learned as an officer in the infantry is the importance of people. It is impossible in the military as a leader to get your job done without your people. And that is true in the military, and that is true outside of the military. As leaders, for the leaders that are listening today, our job is to enhance and develop our people. Our job is to help them be more effective and efficient in their role with us than if we were not there. And if we are not investing time in that, then I think we've got to look very carefully at what are we spending time in, right? And time spent with processes, time spent with data, time spent with analytics is all incredibly important. We have to set our people up for success. But whether you're leading a product team, whether you're leading a sales team, whether you're leading a marketing team, a finance team, the results that are delivered are the collective efforts of everybody, ideally pulling in the same direction. So people really are at the very center of companies, of teams, and of success. And our job as leaders and managers is to help them be better. And part of that is about coaching. And I expect as we go through this, we'll dig into, well, what is coaching? What is good coaching? What does it look like? What are some of the challenges that people have within that? And I would say the first challenge is, frankly, one of time, right? It's about being deliberate about how and where we spend our time. I would argue that a one-to-one with members of your team is as important, if not more important, than scheduled meetings with your customers and prospects. And so the way I have come to view coaching is in my weekly one-to-ones, those meetings are structured, they are scheduled, and they are immovable unless there's clearly a crisis. And I view them as my number one priority. I prepare for them in advance. We have a collaborative sheet to understand what it is we want to talk about. And then we structure our conversations with a couple of frameworks that I may share later to help us have those effective conversations. So it starts with an appreciation of what is our function as leaders, and then a personal commitment to protecting that life, that time, as if our very lives, careers, business performance depended on it, because it does.
You mentioned, and I think it's interesting, that it is actually more important to have those one-on-one with your team members instead of your customers. But I can also imagine or immediately hear people think, yeah, but Andy, I mean, customers always have to come first, right? If we don't have the customers, we don't have a business. So shouldn't we prioritize them?
Yeah, I'm saying the priority is as important as your customers. And very often, and look, I fell into this trap earlier in my leadership career. I really didn't understand the importance of coaching. I didn't even really know what good coaching was. And here we get to the second challenge, right? Generally, in the sales world, many of us are not born into leadership, right? Many of us are promoted because we kind of did okay as an individual contributor. But the skills that you have as an individual contributor are only part of what you need as a sales leader. They're only part of what you need to be an effective coach. And just like the practice we have to put into being prepared to have effective conversations with our customers in those very precious few moments that we all get with them nowadays. I'd argue that we have to put the same level of deliberate practice and self-paced learning into becoming great coaches. Long story short, if you're moving into sales leadership, if you aspire to move into sales leadership, or if you're early in your career in sales leadership, invest time in becoming a better coach. Because guess what? Coaching is free. It costs nothing other than time. And the time you spend developing your people in the midterm will deliver way, way more than if you try and do everything yourself. There's a lot of data out there, right? It impacts win rates. It impacts deal velocity in a positive way. Indeed, the third thing it impacts, right, is retention. And actually, in a market we're all looking to hire world-class talent, once you get that talent and you ramp that talent up and it's become effective, you need to keep it. So win rates, right, deal velocity, and retention of top talent are three key reasons why, as a sales leader, it's in your interest to become a great coach.
Okay. You said that is indeed something that people should, self-improve on. If they want to eventually become a leader, they also need to train or learn themselves on how to become a great coach. Have you good practices when it comes to that? If you, for example, see someone in your team and you think, all right, this person thrives in what he or she is doing, maybe it's an idea to promote that person eventually. Do you then already try to do certain things to eventually get that person going as a great coach as well?
Yeah, I would argue that, as I've said, is as important to practice and to coach against as it is to practice and coach our conversations with our customers and prospective customers, right? Many of us will put time aside to rehearse ahead of important meetings. I would suggest that for managers, that for all of us, we can all improve, right? I'm not trying to suggest that I am anything like the perfection. I am still learning every single day. I still try new frameworks, right, to see how they fit. Do they help me when I try them on for size, just like a new shirt or a new sweater, right? Is it comfortable? Does it feel good? And so I would say, as a manager, put time into understanding some of the frameworks that are out there for you, and be open about when you're using a new framework with your people, because they'll know it whether you tell them or not. And just say, hey, I'd like to get your feedback on this new concept that I have to help make our coaching sessions better. Would that be okay? And guess what? Nobody ever says no. And then if you fumble or stumble, it's a safe environment. But again, that comes from a space of, that mental shift to say, my people are the most important thing in the world. And if I help them become the best version of themselves, they will stay longer. They will deliver a way better customer experience. And as a result of that, my deal size is going to go up. My competitive win rate is going to go up. My loss no decision is going to go down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I want to talk about those frameworks. Maybe before we move on to how you actually practice coaching on a day-to-day basis, I'm also wondering, especially because, again, I think coaching is such a broad term that everybody agrees on. Yes, it is important, but everybody also has a different definition for the term. And so maybe to do kind of an inverting thinking exercise, what would be to you, what would not actually be coaching that people might think it is?
So the first thing that coaching is not, is it's not a forecast call. Coaching is not telling people. If you just give people the answer, for those people that have families and young children that they may be listening, right? The more you tell a kid to do something, in my experience, most of the time, the more the kid will put back on it. It's just part of human reality, right? I know when I was a kid, and quite frankly, to this day, the more somebody tells me I have to do something, the more reluctant I am to fully engage. And do you know what? The most rewarding experience that I have ever experienced is when, during a coaching conversation, the individual who I'm working with comes up with the ideas, because usually they have way more knowledge about the specific situation than I do. And they also, the level of buy-in that they then have to drive through to whatever end result, whatever goal you have, is so much higher. Their commitment will see them through even in the most difficult of times. So it's not forecasting calls, it's not telling. It is a process of helping facilitate a conversation that helps people look at the opportunities in front of them, what it is they're trying to achieve, and then working with you to understand what the pros and cons of the different scenarios might be. And then, of course, at the end, it's about crystallizing that into action and holding all parties accountable for delivering against the agreed upon action.
That's good. That's actually good. There's also one thing that you mentioned earlier, which is that you don't want to, and that's part of like, you don't want to tell, I suppose, is the aspect of being like the super sales. Because on the one hand, you want to be a role model, right? You want to be an inspiration. So you want to be the super sales to some extent. But on the other, you also want, you people to fail, you people to have ownership over what they, over their own responsibilities. And so I think that's somewhat of a balance that you have to manage as a leader. And so I don't know, what's your take on that particularly?
So I remember in the first couple of years that I was entrusted with teams, I fell into the trap of what I call being a super rep, right? And there were other traps. Oh my God, I have so many scars from mistakes I've made, right? I could literally write a book. Maybe I should. But the point, well, hopefully I can save a few people a few mistakes along the way. But look, one of those was thinking that part of my job as a manager was to parachute myself into a deal at whatever point in time and somehow be the hero, somehow be the person that got it across the line, that did the closing, that did the tough negotiation, that dealt with the objections, whatever it might be. And here's the truth. The truth is that sometimes you need to do that. And I think the situational behavior model is a really helpful framework. When people are unfamiliar with a task or an environment, sometimes part of what we need to do as a leader is to show them what good looks like. And then as they become more familiar with that and they go through the learning cycle from, unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence through to finally unconscious competence, of course, it's really important to do less showing, less telling, and more facilitating. So there's a lot of information out there about situational behavior and coaching to that. So in some cases, it is really important to jump in, to help people prepare, to give very structured guidance on what good looks like in a particular situation. But look, as a first-line manager, many first-line managers will have 5 to 8 people. Some people have more. You can't be across every meeting. You can't be across every deal. You can't be in every customer phone call or prospect call. At some point, you have to help those people stand on their own 2 feet. And so the mistake I fell into for a period of time was figuring out, okay, actually, I don't need to do too much of that. Or it wasn't even as conscious as that. I'd parachute into deals. I'd kind of help close them or move them forward. And then I'd jump to the next one. And then I'd jump to the next one. And I was so busy in the deals, thinking quite rightly, deals are the priority, right? Deals are what in sales we get paid on. Only when we come first. There's no prizes for second, right? You're just the first loser. So I fell into that trap. And it meant I was incredibly busy. And because I was too busy, I then couldn't coach my people. And because I couldn't coach my people, they never got the skills. So that I then had to, more often than not, jump in and help them out. And with the greatest humility, I'm not the best salesperson in the room. I'm not the best salesperson on the planet. Sometimes I get it right, sometimes I don't. How much better is it to have the people that are most intimately familiar with that deal, with the stakeholders, with the goals of those stakeholders? How much better if they had the skills? How much better would it be for them, for me, and for the business, right? And the answer is, don't be a super rep. There are still times and occasions when we all need to step in as leaders and give air cover to our people. There will always be a place for that. We should ask nothing of our people that we are not prepared to do ourselves. A golden rule that the army taught me. Never, ever, ever ask people to do something that you're not prepared to do yourself. But also understand, as we spoke about earlier, your job is not to be the super rep. Your job is not to be the smartest person in the room. Your job as a leader is to create a culture and environment where you have diverse people coming together to look jointly at problems and opportunities, to surface the best ideas, and to facilitate a conversation where every voice is heard. No one of us is as smart as all of us. So if you do a great job of surfacing the ideas of everybody, ultimately you get that meritocracy of ideas where the best options will come to the fore. And as a leader, it's incredibly empowering because no longer, oh, look at me with some hand gestures. I never knew we could do that on Riverside. No longer do we have to be the smartest person in the room. We just have to be thoughtful and intentional about making sure everybody's voice is heard.
I love that. I absolutely love that. All right, guys. Imagine being able to leverage the data from LinkedIn, Google, any website, and then leveraging prompt engineering and generative AI to craft the perfect message. That's now possible thanks to Clay. Clay truly revolutionizes the outbound game, and so you can try it out for free by surfing to wearesales.com/Clay. That's wearesales.com/CLAY. All right, let's go back to the episode. Maybe we should move into how you're then coaching now day to day, because I'm sure that people are more than convinced that yes, it is important. They might also now understand like the distinction between what is management versus what is coaching. But so I'm still curious, like how do you then approach it in your day to day? Can we try to make it tactical?
So a couple of ideas. Number one is establishing framework, a rhythm of the business, if you like. So for me, for all of my directs, I have set aside time every week when I and this adjusts a little bit over time as I work for a longer period with someone. It can adjust from time to time if they're under a particular workload. So if they've got more on, I will lean into this as more. But I start from committing at least 25 to 45 minutes a week in a dedicated one-to-one conversation with all of my reports. I then layer on top of that a quarterly conversation. And this works for me. Some people might want to do it more frequently than that. But for me, I layer on top of that a quarterly conversation where we step away from the regular business and we look at a strategic level, the skills that individual and the experiences that they want to work on. And we do that against a set, usually three, but certainly no more than 5 objectives that we set ourselves each quarter. They are aligned both to business outcome, but importantly, they're also aligned to the skills and knowledge that that person is looking to develop. So I have regular weekly check-ins to talk about tactical stuff in the business. Where do they need help? What are they struggling with? I ask simple questions like, what's the best thing that's happened to you this week? Right? Because this year, my goodness, it has been one hell of a year. I think as I look back on my career, this is probably the toughest year that I've ever experienced. And it's important, even in that environment, that tough environment, that we look for wins, that we celebrate wins, because wins are there. They may not be big wins, but there are little wins every single day and every single week. So we talk about what's happened to you this week that's been great. We also talk about things like what are you struggling with the most? And those are two really effective questions to then launch into specific topics. And then you talked, Dylan, about frameworks. One of my favorite frameworks for coaching is the GROW model. And funnily enough, GROW is an acronym. G is for goals. So what is the goal? What is the objective? What is the person trying to achieve? R is reality. So think about the situation. What are some of the constraints that they're dealing with? Is it resource constraints? Is it time constraints? Is it something else? But it's important to understand the reality. O is then options. So that's a facilitated conversation to say, hey, you've thought about this a lot. You're closest to it. What do you see as some of the options? And have that person, force that person to think it through. And don't let go of that. That's probably, along with the goal and the reality, it's really important. That is where I think as a coach, you can add the most value. And I always love a little bit of feedback that, when somebody shares an idea is to acknowledge that and say, that's great. And I wonder if, rather than using the word but, right? How often do we find ourselves with somebody that spins up an option that maybe we might not initially understand or appreciate, and we say, yeah, but what about this? But what about that? We go immediately into all of the problems that undermine it. How different is it when we say, Dylan, that's really interesting, and I wonder if you've thought about this particular constraint, or I wonder if you've thought about some of the consequences of what that might be. Should we just play that out? And you have the same conversation, but you frame it in a fundamentally different manner. And then W is all about will. And for me, this is all about understanding and catalyzing action, right? It's agreeing about who is going to do what, how we are going to hold ourselves accountable. It's about what support they need. So I really like the GROW framework. I really find that it's something that is of immense value. And, I remember last week when you and I were preparing for this conversation today, I found myself unconsciously talking to you about what is the goal of today? Tell me more about the audience that are listening today. Who are they? What are their roles? What are the things that, that they're obsessed about, worried about, keeping them up? How do we want to structure? What are the options for structuring the conversation? So it's such a wonderfully simple framework, and yet it is so powerful when you start to apply it. Again, lots of information online. It's called the GROW framework. I really encourage people that are looking for a framework to try it on for size and let us know how they get on.
Yeah, absolutely. Because isn't the GROW framework something that you just, have as a mental framework that, you keep somewhere in your mind and that you take with your conversation? Or is it really a step-by-step conversation, one-on-one meeting that you have based on that GROW framework?
I'm a big fan of frameworks that guide and advise us, as opposed to frameworks that are like a straight jacket that bind us. The reality is, what was it, Mike Tyson? Everybody's got a good plan until you get punched in the nose, right? And the reality is that plans have to adapt. Conversations have to flow. Our conversation today, we had a rough outline of the topics we wanted to cover. We had some ideas of some of the points that we wanted to touch upon. But at no point, I hope, do people feel like we're following the script, because the reality is very different from how we anticipate it. But I would still say that we are being true to the framework that we set out. And that framework came about because we discussed at length what the goal of today's conversation was. What did we want to get across to the wonderful listeners?
I like that. You also mentioned that you would actually be looking for a certain time frame, a certain one-on-one per person that you have in your team. Does it also mean that it is somewhat of a metric that you can capture? Is it something that you can track something that you can then also improve on later on because it is something trackable. Is that also something you work with?
So one of the goals I set myself this year was to measure, and this is more of a quantitative input than a qualitative input, but I made a commitment that I wanted to work towards dedicating 20% of my time to coaching the people in my organization. And again, that's not just my direct reports, because my influence, I hope, goes much further than just my directs. It really should do. My job is to make everybody in my organization that reports into me directly and indirectly better at their jobs than if I was here. And my most effective tool in that, one of my most effective tools in that, is to spend time with them to understand the realities within which they're operating. And so for me, there are two things. I look at that time, and I'm not at 20%, hands up, I've not quite got there. But, I'm somewhere between, on a weekly basis, somewhere between 16 and 18% on average. So I'm certainly better. And the point here for me is that I'm spending more time, and I've been more deliberate about this year than I was last. And I credit a good friend and gentleman called Scott Edinger, who is one of the world's leading experts on coaching. Again, he publishes some fantastic information for those people that are looking for more. Scott Edinger. And he and I had a conversation about 2 years ago, and it just enlightened me in terms of what was a fundamental opportunity that was there in front of me. So I'm about 16 to 18%. But of course, one of the things I will also do as part of the cadence of conversations with people is I'm very deliberate in asking for feedback. I want to learn, what am I doing well? And more importantly, what are the areas that I can improve to support you better? And I've had 2 of those conversations with my leadership team today, and it's been really enlightening. I've learned stuff about stuff that I can continue to improve. But it's only by willing to be vulnerable as a leader and accept that none of us are perfect, that we then open ourselves up to feedback that can actually fundamentally change the impact that we have through where and how we spend our time.
Look, I absolutely love that. I think that it is clear evidence that there is a clear intention. From the moment that you can put a number to it, as you said, 16 to 90%, and the goal is 20%, it is clear that that is an intention, that is something that you work towards. And I think that is definitely something I would recommend many other leaders to do, or at least to consider doing.
And if people are going to do that, I'd recommend one further thing, if I may. And that is to be open and transparent about the commitment, and then to seek what I call accountability partners.
Love it.
People within your organization that help hold you accountable for the commitments you've made. It's such a simple trick, and it's such a powerful way of helping other people advocate and support for you. Dylan, I'd really like your help with this. Would you mind being an accountability partner for me as I work towards spending 20% of my time? I'm not asking for much of your time. I'm just asking for regular feedback. Would you be comfortable with that? And guess what? I've never had anybody say no, ever.
Look, it doesn't surprise me, as long as the culture inside the company is strong and aligns with that core value, which I would actually recommend any organization to follow it. It doesn't surprise me there. To come back to something that you also mentioned earlier, or I don't know if you actually mentioned it, but you made a distinction between the quarterly meetings, where there you really take 3 to 5 strategic objectives that your team members will focus on. Is then that a meeting really focused on the competence of your team members, and the team meetings that you have on a regularly basis, on a weekly basis, are those then more performance-driven meeting, or do you actually even make like that distinction at all?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So there is a balance between what I would call competence-led meetings and performance-led meetings. But of course, if we go back to the quarterly meetings, we call them GPS check-ins. Growth, perform, success, succeed. Part of that is we ground ourselves in performance. Again, in the world of sales, we have really clear performance metrics. As an individual contributor, you've got your quota. As a sales leader, you've got your quota. But there are other metrics as well that we use. So we typically look back at the objectives we set previously, the performance objectives, and we understand how have we performed against them. We then have a conversation that goes into, okay, let's understand why have we seen those outcomes. And typically that's there when we start to get into the area of competence. So we start with performance. That is that levels everybody to make sure that we have a shared view of where we're at. Because until we have a shared view, if I'm here and you're over here, we don't have a solid shared foundation for a conversation. So we've got to ground in that performance. Then we go into understanding why have we seen that those particular results, and are there some specific competencies that we need to address as a result of that. We then will move into, and what are some of the, what are some of your goals for the next quarter? And what are some of the additional competencies that we haven't covered that you might need to, help to develop? And how are we going to go do that? What is my role to help you with that? Because look, nobody is more responsible for my career and my success than me. And so, whether we're tempted to, I would never outsource my success to somebody else. And I feel very passionately about that. So when it comes to learning, we've got to take on the balance of learning ourselves as individuals, but as coaches, we're there to help, signpost people and give them feedback along the way. We're not always there just to teach them. So we start with performance, we move into competencies, we set objectives for the next quarter ahead, we agree how we'll measure that, and we'll talk about any additional competencies or objectives that people have. So it's a mix of both. In the weekly meetings, typically it's more tactical. Typically it's around, hey, how are things going? I want to check how my people are. In a world where many of us are working remotely or in a hybrid environment, we really need to be deliberate in understanding, are our people in a good place, right? Mentally, are they empowered? Do they feel refreshed? Are they, getting a little bit tired and just need a little bit of TLC? So I always want to check in with that. And then I want to look at what are the tactical things that they're struggling with? Where can I get into their business to help them? But again, it's from a facilitated point of view, right? Sometimes I will do stuff, absolutely, to help. But ultimately, it's more of a tactical, what are the business problems right now? What are the things? What are you trying to achieve in the next week? So it's much more short term, and it tends to be pretty laser focused. Whereas the quarterly, it's more of a look out to the horizon. Do we want to be at that hill or do we want to be over there in that valley?
All right. That's clear. Hi guys, on May 16, 2024, we are hosting the third edition of the We Are Sales Conference. This is the event in Europe when it comes to sales leadership. Our ambition is to eventually get to the 10,000 attendees, so it will mean the world to us to see you there. You can get more information about the event on our website at wearesales.com/conference. All right, let's go back. What I'm still questioning myself about is, are you then basing yourself only on the performance, like the lagging KPIs, if I may say, to then make an assessment of, all right, I feel like, on that particular aspect of the process, there is something that's not going quite well relative to the other people in the team. So maybe that's something that we have to work on. But do you then also know what it is exactly that you need to work on? Or should you also then gather other data points? I know, for example, conversation intelligence is I should almost say like a must-have nowadays. It's so much available. So do then leaders also need to incorporate that? I don't know. What's your take on how you really go about linking the performance with the competence? That linkage is still something I'm questioning myself. Like, how do you best approach that?
Gosh, how do we unpack that? So it's I think it's hard. It's hard today to be a leader unless you have your finger on the pulse, and ultimately, as a first line manager, you can probably be in some of the meetings for some of your people most weeks. As a second line leader, you might be able to be in one or two. As a third, fourth, etc. We have to rely on data. And, when we talk about AI, one of the things that I am most excited about is the impact that generative AI will have on my ability to coach the people that I am here to support and serve. What do I mean by that? Well, we all, for several years now, have gotten used to being recorded on calls, whether on Zoom or Teams or any other technology that's out there. Imagine a world where generative AI can ingest all of those calls, can assess those calls against a skills matrix for a salesperson, and then can provide insight into how they are performing against that rubric, and recommendations on specific skills and competencies that person might want to work on. And guess what? When you do that, because by the way, this is available today, when you do that, we find that skills and competencies, Dylan, that you demonstrate in live customer and prospective customer environments will be different from mine. And so for salespeople, we move from a world where broadly it's kind of like, when we all have to go through certifications, right? Everybody broadly goes through the same learning path that are in the same role, different roles. Most of the time nowadays, we've got much better in carving out the competencies. But imagine a world where you and I are both individual contributors in the same business, selling into the same vertical. We've been at the company the same amount of time, but you have a personalized learning path that has been adjusted and tailored according to the qualities and competencies that you demonstrate in the last quarter's live customer meetings, to my learning path, which focuses on my needs. How much more engaging and effective is it for me as an individual? There we go. We've got the hand signals coming through again, right? And the answer is it's way more engaging. It's way more impactful. And generative AI already allows us to do that. So as a leader, I can use that to enhance the effectiveness of the learning. I can protect the very precious time of my salespeople, and I can look them in the eye and say, hey, Dylan, this is really important, and here's why. We've noticed this, and we'd like to help you get from there to there.
Love it. You also say, imagine a world where. I think that world is getting closer to us. Maybe it is actually already happening. I think maybe there are some tools already that can provide that personalized coaching, all based on, inputs by machine, processed by another machine, and done it is.
Yeah, and look, I'm not here to promote the company that I work for, but I can tell you, I came to Highspot because I have a passion for coaching and development, and I saw the impact that the platform had on my team and my ability to coach them at DocuSign. And for those people that maybe are closer to my age than your age, they'll remember an advert from the 70s that was all about Remington, and the CEO of the company was on the advert featuring saying, I loved the razor so much I bought the company. Well, I didn't buy Highspot, but I am here because I have seen firsthand how the capabilities that we have, and there are other technologies in this space, of course there are, but I've seen and experienced firsthand how it empowers me not just to look at lagging indicators like win rates and deal velocity, but it empowers me to look at leading indicators such as how are my people engaging with that particular piece of content, and is that piece of content, that white paper, that case study, is that influential in driving revenue? If it is, I probably want my people in specific stages of certain sales opportunities to be using that, right? And the ones that use it are usually the ones that there's then usually a correlation with performance. And the same for learning paths. So again, I'm getting leading indicators that can tell me ahead of time, is this individual salesperson broadly showing the behaviors and developing the skills that we know over time will help them not only achieve quota, but smash through their quota.
Doesn't it make you think though, like for sure that means that the role of the coach is going to change. But if we think of it even further, does it, to some extent, how much of a coach will still be necessary? Can it somewhat be replaced by generative AI? I know maybe I'm going too philosophical right now, but like I'm curious, what are your thoughts when it comes to that?
I learned very early in my career to say never to something. What I would say is, for the foreseeable future, the most impactful thing that we can do as leaders is to become great coaches and is to dedicate time to that for our people. And the most impactful thing that we can do as individual contributors is to seek people and to seek to work for and with people that will invest in our in us. And what do I mean by that? So if anybody that's listening out there right now is looking for a job, my recommendation when you're interviewing is to interview the hiring manager and to ask them very specifically how they go about developing and growing the people in their team. I would ask them for concrete, specific examples of how they have done that in the last 3 months. I would explore their commitment to one-to-one. I'd ask to understand, what is the framework for a one-to-one? What does good look like? I want to make sure I get, if I'm on the team, that we get most value from it. How do you like it structured? Because the truth is, the second most important person in your career is your line manager. And the third most important person, aside from your partner and those people around you that support you, is the manager's manager. And so when you're looking for a new role, my very rough guidance is to select the manager first that demonstrates a commitment to your success, that can show you how they've done that for others. And then if you get a tick in the box, make sure that you're comfortable with the company, the value proposition, the market, and all of that stuff. But hire the manager first, and then the company second.
And yeah, I love this so much, because it is a good advice going both ways. I think also for the leader, for the coach that wants the best talents, because what you said there, I think, is especially true for the A talents, for the A players that want to become the best version of themselves, that want to thrive, want to develop themselves. And so I think that is a very powerful advice.
Yep. As an individual, for those people that are looking for a job, select the manager first. But you raised a really important point as well. You talked about the best talent and how talent attracts talent. And again, there are a lot of studies, there are a lot of data, there is a lot of data around this. And so, extending that people concept as being the most important tools and investments that we can make as leaders are our people. one of the other things is making sure that we do a great job of hiring great talent. Because the reality is that the top performers have a relatively low threshold of tolerance for people that maybe consistently underperform, consistently fail to show the commitment to improve. And so, as a leader, it is about creating that safe environment. And I say again, you have to be deliberate about creating a safe environment. If people in your team aren't making mistakes, you're probably not pushing the boundaries. But don't make the same mistake 3 or 4 times. But it's okay when people don't quite execute perfectly, because there's lessons in that. We all learn from that. But again, where you've got low performance, understand that early constructive intervention will not only help that individual, but it will also help you with the retention of your higher performing individuals. It really matters. There's nothing worse than, somebody dripping poison into the well from which we all drink. And it's a strong word, but consistent underperformance will start to undermine the overall performance of a team if not dealt with.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I remember what I wanted to say is that, indeed, if a new hire challenge you on your coaching ability, that is very interesting in that one direction, but in the other as well. Because when we also come back to the point of generative AI, what AI will never be able to achieve, in my personal opinion, is having a strong human-to-human connection, having that recognition by the leader, by the team. And so if you can demonstrate indeed that willingness to coach and develop your team members, that is always something that will thrive and is never going to be replaceable by generative AI. And again, that's my fair opinion on the topic.
I could not agree with you more. And there's a gentleman that many people may well know, and that is Colin Powell. And if you think about Colin Powell and his very deep experience in the military and then his move into politics, whether you agree with his political stance or not, doesn't matter. The guy kind of knows or knew what he was talking about. And what he says about leadership is we deal in one currency, and the only currency that matters as a leader is the currency of trust. And our job as leaders is to create that environment where the people around us trust us. And that has to be earned every single day. It is the most precious thing that we can spend time to earn. And it's also incredibly fragile. 1 or 2 silly acts can undermine the trust that we have built, intentional or unintentional, very, very quickly. So it is about being consistent. It is about being true to our words. Our actions have to follow our words. People will judge you more as a leader for what you do and how you make them feel than what you say. And your words can carry impact. But people will judge you more for your actions first. Are you true? You got to walk the walk as well as talk the talk.
That is so important. Thanks for mentioning that, Andy. We are almost reaching the end of the interview, unfortunately, because I feel like we can go on and on. But there's still one question I wanted to ask you. And it actually also links a little bit about, recruiting A players, because obviously everybody wants A players in their team. That's best. It's best for them, for the team, for the company. But it's not always as easy to get them, and that's one thing. So I'm questioning myself, do you have a different coaching approach for A players versus other team members, or do you say, no, you know what, we just go with one and the same methodology, or how do you try to approach that?
I again would go back to situational behavior and understanding that whilst the overall framework and experience is likely to be similar, when you get into the specifics, when you have a high performer and or somebody that is demonstrating very deep competencies in what the particular subject is that you're coaching in, if they've done it 1,000 times, really, whilst the coaching approach is similar, I'd still talk about grow, but I'd probably index more on the options that they believe are available to them, because they've probably got a pretty damn good idea how to go about it, and they probably got a lot of experience of doing that. So my role there is to try and identify if there is a flaw in their thinking. Has the reality changed and they just haven't realized it, right? And here's the thing, there's no such thing as the new normal, just the next normal. Again, that's something I picked up from a dear friend, Roderick Jefferson. And business evolving at such a rate that we're not going to get to one consistent new normal. There'll just be a series of next normals. And so again, coaching the development, we've got to be testing over time. But with somebody that's doing a task for the first time, whilst I would use the Grow framework, I would probably be more directive in my approach. I would probably help them more specifically with options, particularly if they're struggling to come up with some options. What I try not to do, and I fall into this trap all the time, is to tell people what to do, because that's not my job.
Fair enough. I think that's a challenge for most leaders out there. So
well, it's quicker, right? If I tell you to do something, I can do that in like 10 seconds. But if I'm going to have a coaching conversation, I have to create the space where I can have 5 or 10 minutes with you. And again, you've got to somehow break that cycle. The super rep was an example that I used there. You have to create time in your diary to be able to have these facilitated conversations, because otherwise you're never going to have the time, and you're always going to be forced into telling, because you just don't have time to go through a more structured conversation.
I like it. It's almost like you have to make yourself redundant to the organization. Like if you coach everybody so perfectly well that they can, just do the work as well as they ever could without you, that's like when you can detach yourself really from being in the organization. That's somewhat kind of or at least it's the idea I'm getting right now of what the goal of the coach could mean.
Yes, and I would say it's not necessarily about making yourself redundant. It's about giving yourself time to do other things that may be more strategic. And if you think about the concept you just talked about, one of my fundamental commitments and jobs as a leader is to develop the leaders of tomorrow. And if I develop the people underneath me, if I develop the people that I'm responsible for, that I serve, and they grow into my role, that might, if I've demonstrated the right qualities, give me an opportunity to move into another role. It might help me move on to something that really is important and passionate to me. But I can only do that when I am developing the leaders of tomorrow. So it's not about redundancy, but it is about moving the entire organization up and to the right.
Right. It's an evolving context and an evolving role that goes with it. And is there like one last thought you want to share with the audience?
Gosh, we've talked about so much. I guess I would sum things up, and I would say the advice I would give my younger self is, as a leader, coaching is free. It costs nothing other than time, and it just happens to be the single most impactful thing that you can do to set your people up for success. Yes, you have to do the other things to create an environment, to have good processes, but actually coaching and developing people is the fundamental job of leadership. Agreeing and defining the goals, coalescing people towards that, and making sure that they're enabled to deliver their contribution to the business. That is what we do. I love the Grow framework for that. I think it comes from hiring great talent, from developing great talent, and from retaining that talent. And again, I think coaching plays a very, very important part to that. So practice coaching every day, use some of the frameworks that are out there, be comfortable to share with those that you are coaching that you're trying something new and you'd love their feedback. Because actually, we all need coaching. We all need feedback, no matter how long we've been in a role and how good we might think we are or are not.
Andy, you definitely should write that book. No, for real. Thank you so much, Andy, for coming on, for sharing your fair part of experience, also experience on the topic of coaching. I think the audience will definitely like it. I mean, I did for sure. I think it's also such an important topic. Again, as I said in the beginning, like the situation we're in today is so much different from last year, might be much different from next year. So having that continuous feedback and improvement loop inside the organization through a very decent coach, I think it's the only thing I can wish any organization. So again, Andy, thank you so much. Is there any way that you want to use this platform for as a way, a call to action, maybe linked to Highspot, maybe to yourself, anything you want to share with the audience?
Well, if people have questions around sales enablement and want to understand more about the technology, then obviously highspot.com is a great place to start. But also I'm open. I'd love to get feedback from the audience. If you have questions, then again, please feel to connect with me on LinkedIn. But also feel free to drop me a line, andy.champion@highspot.com. I'd love to keep the conversation going. And most of all, I hope that there are one or two nuggets of information and help that everybody here finds and can apply to their situation, whether an individual contributor, a manager, or a really experienced leader. I hope it's been helpful for everyone.
I'm sure it was. Andy. Andy, again, thank you so much. Wishing you nothing but the best and see you next time.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Dylan.
That's it. We've once again reached the end of an episode. I just really appreciate you all spending the time. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. And until next week with a fresh new episode.